Oh, that was the other thing Jillian said. She was like, oh, and you have to talk about how a couple weeks ago after church, we all went to dinner together. She goes, because that doesn't happen for most people with the blended family.
Welcome to the Crucible Project podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Welcome back to the Crucible podcast. I am your host today, Joy. Today I am joined by two of our Crucible men, Joe and Kenton. Hey guys, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Joy?
Good. All right. Well, I'll let you introduce yourselves. So go ahead and jump on in.
My name is Kenton Larson. I am a Colorado native, currently from Arvada, Colorado.
My name is Joe Troupe. I'm also a Colorado native. So we're two of the few, I think, at this point.
True statement.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad that you guys could join me. So, I have you both here today, and it's not just because you are both Crucible men. You also have a pretty special family relationship. Can one of you tell us about how you are connected?
Kenton is married to my ex-wife, is how we were originally connected. Kenton was the one that led me to take the steps to do my initial weekend at Crucible.
Very nice. And you guys have some awesome kids that you're co-parenting. Is that accurate?
We do. We have two, Jack and Jill. Jillian's in 6th grade and middle school, and then we have Jackson's in 4th grade.
Very nice. Kenton, you were the first one from your family group that got connected to Crucible. Tell us a little bit about that story.
For sure. So I go to Flatirons Community Church in Lafayette. Pastor Jim talked about his Crucible experience from stage, I'm going to say, quote unquote, many years ago. I was at a Flatirons men's retreat when I felt God nudging me to go to Crucible. And so myself and a buddy signed up and went to our initial weekend in the spring of 2016. That was a busy year of spiritual formation, is usually how I describe that. My, at the time, girlfriend, Joe's ex-wife, and I were both leading step studies through our church recovery program. And then I went on my Crucible initial weekend, and then we got married later that fall.
Wow, very cool. Help me understand the timeline just a little bit. So, Joe, you and your wife were previously married, and then, you had a couple kids and then got divorced. About when was that?
We split up about 2014. The end of our marriage was super rough mentally, emotionally, due to my faults. But we had actually filed for divorce and then found out she was pregnant. Jackson was actually born after we were divorced.
Kenton, she started going to the same church that you were at, and you guys got connected through a recovery ministry. Is that accurate?
We were both part of Shift, which is our church's brand of Celebrate Recovery. That is an atypical thing that I do not recommend for anyone. We actually had a lot of conversations with people we trusted about that. But yeah, we crossed paths after both spending a couple years there. Part of her story we'll glance off of is she found recovery through the end of her marriage with Joe.
Kenton, what was life like for you before you went into your Crucible weekend?
Going into my initial weekend, I would say I found myself kind of fragmented, right? I did not accept all of myself, including the judgments I have of myself and the feelings that I have very well. I see Crucible and my weekend and now the soul group that I've been with since 2017. This is all just the latest iteration of my recovery journey. I claim myself as being in some sort of recovery for a long time. Across 2 different churches and several different ministries, what I have found is that my pre-Crucible, I'm going to say my life is not well emotionally regulated. I'm a recovering codependent. My opinion of myself, my feelings about myself are way dependent on your feelings about me, your judgments about me, or even more, the judgments that I think you have about me. So that's been the grand overarching arc of my life, is understanding myself, my feelings, and then in what part of that is actually part of myself and what part of that is just being influenced by others. The Bible says to love others as you love yourself, but that's really hard if you don't love yourself well.
That makes sense. So what did you get for yourself then from your weekend?
My initial weekend opened my life to the possibility my life could be different. We've brought some of the tools that are taught at the initial weekend back into our family life. As an introvert, I'm kind of over like the stereotypical men's retreat. How Crucible was experiential and yet individual, and even as an introvert, it was unique to me, or my experience was unique to me, if you will. That set me up for a year later when I got into that soul group, that group of men, and then I staffed another initial weekend. That's where a lot of my journey started, but couldn't get there without have taken that one first step.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, I had a similar experience. Some people go and feel like the weekend was just so transformative within those 36 hours. And for others, myself included, it's more of a slow burn where it was a step in the journey. And then I continued the journey, continued the learning, continued the work and the principles. And that's really where I started to see those shifts.
And not to say that that 36 hours wasn't impactful, right? I think everybody talks about coming home and crying for a week or whatever. Definitely the weekend hit hard for me, but I can't point you to, and then these three areas of my life were completely different.
Right.
But without that foundational, I'm going to call introspection as part of that weekend, nothing else would have changed.
Yeah. So you went on your weekend, you and Angie connected and eventually got married. So from what I understand, you invited Joe, and Joe, you mentioned that earlier, to go on a weekend. So how did that all transpire?
I disclaim some of this responsibility because Crucible has been really good for my life. The way I remember it was I probably mentioned it to you, Joe, maybe once in passing, but I didn't feel like I knew you well enough to be like, this is a thing you need in your life. My memory is more Angie's influence based on how she saw our dynamic changing, that she encouraged you to do the thing. But I would like to hear your perspective because I'm not sure I've actually heard it.
My first introduction, I think, to Crucible was similar to yours. Many years ago. I want to say this was prior to Jillian being born, so like 2010, somewhere prior to that. And kind of similar when we were going to Flatirons, heard other people speak about Crucible. And so, I mean, it had been in my back of my head at like, oh, this is something you should do at some point in life. And it was always just way at the back of there. And now that you're saying that, I think you're right on that. Ange did highly encourage it and was telling me how impactful it was to you. And I think that kind of like reignited. And I was at a pretty dark place at that time. So I think she kind of started the whole push nudge thing. And there's some like initially uncomfortable the way people talk about crucibles. It's like, am I about to join a cult?
I think I may have Googled, is Crucible Project a cult?
Exactly. And so being able to have those conversations with you, and I remember we had that beer brewing day where you were just super open about it, gave me a ton of comfort. And then I think I'm struggling to remember the timeline too, but then when you took me to the church in Arvada with a bunch of the Crucible and Derek and all of those other guys were given the nudge. Oh, that must have been, I was already paid at that point. I guess for some backstory, I finally decided to sign up, take the plunge. This was in 2020 in March, and I had all of my bags packed. I was finishing up a couple things at work. I was organizing with the guys on my carpool, and then I get an email, the weekend has been canceled because of COVID. That was when my original weekend was supposed to take place. Throughout everything else, I think it took me almost 2 more years to actually make it up after everything had been paid and Crucible opened back up, and monthly phone calls from Crucible leadership about, hey, when are you going on your weekend? You're paid. Get in your car and drive up here. Here's when it is. So
Joe, if you can tell us a little bit, what was like for you before you stepped into your weekend? I know you said before in 2020 when it got canceled, you were in a pretty dark place. Was that still lingering for you, or were you in a different place that you chose that was the time?
So by the time I finally made it up, I was in a much better place than I was before. So to like step back going through the divorce and all of that was probably one of the darkest times of my life. Every decision I made was super ego driven. So I was a chef prior to my current career, and I was at this point where all of the people I was hanging out with were other chefs, and a lot of them are like James Beard award winning, like these really renowned people. Like I was in local newspapers and articles and getting these cool reviews. So I let all of this kind of go to my head, and it felt like this couple year period, every decision I made was super ego driven. And obviously without putting God first, everything's bound to just fall down around. So that led to trying to open my own restaurant in the midst of going through a divorce and Jackson being born, my restaurant opened less than a month after he was born. So just finished a divorce, having a child born, and trying to open a restaurant all within 3 months. And I'm sure you can imagine how that went. It led to, I was really struggling with alcoholism, drinking every single night. There'd be nights where the rest of the staff had gone home and I would sit at the bar by myself with a bottle of whiskey and sleep on the kitchen floor for a couple hours to sober up so I could drive home. And once I finally was able to get through that part, I was in not quite so dark of a spot, but everything was still there. It was stuff that I hadn't actually dealt with. I feel like I put on a surface persona that everything was much better than it was, but all of that stuff was still there and stuff that I was still struggling with on a super regular basis. I mean, at that point, it was 5-6 years later.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And you went on your weekend, and what did you get for yourself from your weekend?
A couple things. And I agree with Kenton. I think there were definitely some big aha type of moments that I had in there that I think were more immediate changes. And I think a lot of that has to do with the ego part, and this is why I need to put God first. The bigger kind of slow burn to me was my relational issues. I too am really introverted. Even the people closest to me in life have a tendency to hold out at arm's length. And I don't think I realized that at the time. That's something that I became hyper aware of and able to, like Kenton said, this is a super long recovery process. I'm not better. This isn't something I do 100% now, but it's something that I'm aware of and continue to work through on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis.
Yeah, I mean, it is a journey, and that's why we call it that. There's no final destination. We're always working towards healing and bringing our whole selves forward. And that is a challenge at times, especially when the world wants to tell us that we're too much or we're too broken or whatever the case may be. So let's talk about what Crucible has meant for you both, because the birth dad, stepdad dynamic, I would imagine, can be one that can be tricky to navigate at times, and especially when it comes to kids who are entering into teenage years and getting a little older and going between houses. So what was life like trying to navigate the dynamics of a blended family before both of you had been on a Crucible weekend?
Complicated, murky. These would be some of the words I think I would use. When Aunt and I got together, the kids were young, and almost every day was a transition day. They were either coming or going. Though I have my own opinions on parenting, be straight up with you and tell you that I don't have that much experience parenting. And it's also weird because, Joe, you'll have the right number of years, but you and Ange were together for a long time. And so as the new boyfriend, fiance, husband, and the codependent one, there's a bit of how do I fit into this dynamic, right? These are not my kids by blood. I am not the one that's been around forever. And so I end up tiptoeing or just squashing my opinions, feelings, thoughts down because they don't have value.
Yeah, so it sounds like, Kenton, you kind of took a backseat role in a lot of these things, which is difficult as a partner in a marriage, but then feeling less than a part of a partnership when it came to the kids that you're caring for as well and loving in your home.
I like your word backseat role. Yes. Follow along, right? Not be a leader, lead my house.
Joe, what was it like for you?
I mean, everything was fine. We didn't have, like Ken said, Angela and I were together forever. We met when I was a freshman in high school. So we know each other really, really well. I grew up with divorced parents, and I feel like most of my friends had divorced parents, and I know how ugly a lot of that can be. And so I think we were always kind of aware of that and wanted to make sure that there was no open disagreement and stuff like that. But that's all it was. It was fine. There was no intention. It was like check boxes rather than doing anything intentional and that type of thing. I feel like even prior to Crucible, it was probably better than it is for a lot of people in that way, as far as, especially for the kids' sake, there was no intention there. I think we would say things to be united, but I don't think we actually were oftentimes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the co-parenting thing from my seat has never felt contentious. Like Joe says, it's fine. Get along.
Yeah. Did you get any feedback from the kids during that period, especially when they were younger, about going between houses or what that was like for them?
Back then, like Jack was baby still, so there wasn't really any feedback from him. Jillian never said anything, at least as far as I'm aware of, but there were definitely, as it's rough for kids that age and something they shouldn't be going through. through. You could tell by not necessarily behavior, but she's visibly upset on some transition days. And I mean, it does cause a confusion, that type of thing to them.
That makes sense. Since you both have gone on Crucible weekends, you've both been involved in the work of the organization, and more impressively, you guys even staff together. So you choose to come back and volunteer, stand as brothers, leading other men through the work. How does that impact your family dynamic now? What does that intentionality look like at this point now?
The biggest thing to me is that the kids can see through all four of their parents what we prioritize and that God is a priority in our life by doing Crucible, by making church a priority every single week, by all of those decisions that we make. I think it also gives us a common language that we can speak. After I went to Crucible, I think it made a strong enough impression on my current wife that she wanted to go do something similar. And the same message is being spoken, the same values, and it causes a lot less confusion. And I think the cohesion between everywhere is they're not hearing one thing in our home and then the next day going and hearing a completely different message.
I agree. I try really hard to follow God in my life and to lead my household. I am excited, happy, because I know that my kids' actual dad is doing the same. It gives me a lot more hope for success of my step parenting because I know both of us and all four parents are working to lead our households towards God. I think transition days are easier. Today is actually transition day. The kids just left our house and they're going back to Joe's house tonight. I was taking Jillian to school this morning and I asked her what she thought we should talk about on the podcast. She immediately said we should talk about how in both households we put God first and make decisions that do that. And that's pretty great. We had one of those middle school conversations this
Oh
morning.
no.
I almost texted to be like, hey, so you remember some of those concepts we've learned? Is 12 too early to start passing some of those down? And then I thought better of it.
Yeah.
Oh, that was the other thing Jillian said. She was like, oh, and you have to talk about how a couple weeks ago after church, we all went to dinner together. She goes, because that doesn't happen for most people with the blended family.
Yeah.
So she notices.
And
Yeah.
it's not just us, it's Kenton's parents and Andrew's parents and my parents, and we'll all do and be together and everything. I mean, I think we all recognize that it's for the kids and it's for God. It's not about Kenton and I. We have a job to do that's not necessarily about us. So I coach Jackson's flag football team, and there's a couple other kids who are from blended families, and it's kind of shocking to me, honestly, how rare it is when we're at Jack's football games and Jillian's concerts and Jillian's rugby and all of those things, like we're together and supporting them together. It's kind of sad how uncommon that is, and I would love that for more people.
Yeah, absolutely. I know my work through Crucible has been looking at the parts of myself that I try to show the world versus the parts of myself that I try to hide. But the ones that I try to hide always come out sideways anyways. They still show up just in unhealthy ways. And so the more that I try to keep that in front of me and recognize it's not necessarily about my actions, it's about the motivation behind the actions. And recognizing when I'm acting from a motivation that is good and when I'm acting from a motivation that is, more of that like shadowy, selfish side, trying to get something or manipulate a situation. I have better relationships when I'm able to be honest about the parts of myself that I like and the parts of myself that I don't like. And we can have a more free relationship with each other because I'm trying to show up with the best that I have. So that's my story. I'm curious, do you guys see that playing out at all in the way that you work through conflict as a blended family? Inevitably conflict comes up in any family, so we can't pretend like it's not there. So how do the tools or the things that you got for yourself from Crucible impact when conflict comes?
I honestly have a hard time thinking of a ton of conflict we have as like the blended family portion. I feel like one of the things that was helpful about Crucible is that we communicate about stuff ahead of time, and I feel like over communicate probably about everything. All four of us are always aware of exactly what's going on in the kids' lives and stuff like that. I don't know the last time. Maybe in your house it's a little bit different and you might have some experiences, but I can't remember the last time that we had something heated that was related to like different household or anything like that.
I think that owning my selfish, shadowy self versus looking outside myself means that the kids aren't a wedge between myself and my wife. We've always had the rule of I'm not going to smack talk Joe in front of the kids. It's not fair. That's not helpful. But owning my shadowy self means that I can own my own brokenness and I can recognize others' brokenness and set it aside easier. And what that means is blended family, kids, inevitable imperfect communication between parents doesn't become a wedge between me and my wife and me and our kids. It enables things to stick together more and for me not to isolate myself and blame others for it.
I mean, that's the key right there, right? Being who we are called to be as Christ followers and modeling for our kids that we do live in a broken world. We are messed up. Everyone has a story, but there is redemption. And we do our best each day to own the things that we need to own and, move towards Jesus in every way that we can. And it's so cool that your kids not only have that from one mom and one dad, but they have that from 4 parents who are pouring into them in such meaningful and intentional ways. What a gift that you guys are giving this generation of kids that you have.
And I think I would follow that with 2 truths. One's kind of a wish for the kids and also for other men. The amount of times that folks who have staffed with one or both of us have been like, wow, you guys' story gives me hope on my journey is a thing that I underappreciate. I mean, I don't know, man. I'm just living my life, doing the best I can. But the fact that we can work through this is a thing that I don't value probably as highly as I should.
I think when we staffed the bulk of other men that were staffing there, I don't think they realized what our relationship was. They just thought we were bros until the last day when we were cleaning up or something like that. The people's reactions were super cool that we were doing this together. And yeah, I agree that even just that day, like 3 or 4 people come up and talk about how that impacted them.
And to be honest, that rolls downhill because in my soul group, there are 2 men who all have a similar situation. One went on an initial weekend, eventually invited the other to go. The second man, whatever, blended family. One's married to the other's ex-wife. It's the same kind of story. And the way that they worked their journey out, not necessarily gave me hope because, like I said, our relationship's never been contentious, but it continues to be like that. Oh, hey, this works for other people. The last retreat I was on, I actually got the opportunity to share that back to my previous friends. And I was like, hey, because you did your work with that man, I can do my work with this man. And now we're paying that forward. I have mixed feelings. This goes into my other truth and my wish. We are passing this on to the next generation. I have my stuff, Joe, you have your stuff. Jack's going to grow up with his set of stuff. And eventually I hope that Crucible can be a good tool for his life to be the best it can be. And yet I hope he has less stuff to carry than either of us because of the work we're doing. And that's my wishes. Now, I don't know how to pay that forward to the next generation, our tweener-ish and teenage kids. I mean, you've got older boys at your house. Yep. How do we pass these on to them?
I think that's something that Crucible taught me as well, is it doesn't matter. None of us are free of everything, and it's just going to weigh on people differently, regardless of how hard we work to not present that stuff to Jack. It's going to be there. And so to me, this is something you're going to have to deal with in life. You're not going to be free from tribulations. So to me, it's like, you're going to have this. You need to deal with it. And there's the healthy and productive way of something in the vein of Crucible and putting the stuff on God. And then there's the drinking and passing out on a kitchen floor that's not.
I mean, it's biblical too, right? Like scripture tells us in this world, you're going to have trouble, but take heart because he has overcome the world. And with that, he's given us people in our lives. We were created to be communal people, to need one another, to rely on one another. So Kenton, and Joe, I'm with you guys. I have 3 young kids, but 2 who are getting a little bit older, elementary, middle school age. And there's so much that I want to do to protect them from the world. And I heard a quote once about how you could love your child perfectly. You could do everything for your kid, and they're still going to be wounded by some of the things that you do because we each interpret love differently. They're going to need something at some point that I fail to give them, even through my best intention. And so the best way that I can love them is to support them in their journey of healing, whether it was me who wounded them or a teacher, a friend, who knows, but creating that space and knowing myself well enough that I can encourage them in their healing journey without making it all about me and, well, I must have failed. I must have been awful. That is how you give that gift to the next generation. Being clear and in who you are, being willing to own when you've made wounds toward them, and supporting them in their journey. And that sounds like that's exactly what you guys are doing. Blessings to you both in the journey that you're on and the work that you're doing. And both your kids sound incredible. The things that Jillian shared this morning about what to share on the podcast, like, I don't know a lot of kids who would be able to say, I want you to tell them that we put God first in our family. So that's really cool.
Oh, we were super blessed. They're super awesome little people.
Awesome. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that either of you want to share?
If you're on the fence, just go.
One of my favorite movie quotes recently has been, so what would you do if you were actually desperate? I think Joe and I both hit the point where this has got to change, even though in my life was pretty good before. And so when I went to my initial weekend, opened whatever God had for me, not because XYZ was broken, but it changed what I was doing. So it changed what I'm getting. And you don't have to be messed up beyond all hope to actually make a change.
We've been talking a lot about, in our house, even prior to Flatiron's most recent series, we've been talking a lot about the Holy Spirit and stuff at home. And just like when you feel that tug in your belly, listen to it. If it's godly and biblical, you're being told something. And I felt that tug towards Crucible for 4 years probably. I wish I would have gone the first time I felt that tug and not waited.
Thank you both for your time. Thank you for your investment in Crucible, in your initial weekend and in the ways that you've been connected since. I just bless you both in your family, bless your family, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us, Troy.
Thanks for having us.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. Or if you're ready to get started on your transformational journey right now, you can connect with one of our Crucible certified coaches for a free 30-minute session at thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. That's thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. If you like what you heard, connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening. And don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you for listening.